Do you need to get a license to release your next track? That's a question you might be asking if the track that you want to release is a cover song or if it contains samples. So in this video, I'm going to help clarify if and when you need to get a license and how to go about doing that. So let's go ahead and get started. What's up guys, Justin here, and in this video, it's my goal to help you better understand copyrights and licensing as it pertains to cover songs and samples. Now, before we get started, please be aware that I am not an attorney. Nothing here in this video should be taken as legal advice. I'm simply trying to help you better understand some basic copyright and licensing concepts as they pertain to you as an independent artist. If you have any legal questions, it's best to consult a licensed attorney. So with that little disclaimer out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about when you need to get a license for cover songs and or samples. So first things first, let me quickly explain what a copyright is. So quite simply, a copyright is a legal right that gives its owner the exclusive right to make copies of a creative work. Your music is an intellectual property, and it's your property, and you have the right to create and sell copies of that property. In other words, you can sell your music and make money from it, and other people can't without a license. Now, there are two types of copyrights involved with recorded music. There's the copyright for the sound recording, and then there's the copyright for the underlying work. So here's an example to illustrate. Let's say that you decide to record a cover version of Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen. So once you've recorded your cover of Born to Run, you now own the copyright for that recording. But Bruce Springsteen still owns the copyright for the song itself because he wrote it. So if you want to release your cover of Born to Run, you need to get a license from Bruce Springsteen to use his song in your recording. Now, the good news is this is actually very easy to do, and he has to give you a license. This is called a compulsory mechanical license. You don't actually have to call up Bruce Springsteen and get permission. I'll explain more about how that works in just a minute. First, I want to give you another example pertaining to sampling, which is something different entirely. So let's say that you wanted to actually use part of the original sound recording of Born to Run in a song. In this case, you're not recording your own cover version. Instead, you're taking a sample of the original recording and using the sample in your own song. Well, in that case, things can get a little dicey because while a songwriter is required to give you a license to record a cover version of your song, nobody is required to give you a license to use the sound recording. So if you want to use a sample as part of your song, you need to contact the owner of the recording. Because remember, the copyright for the sound recording is something separate from the copyright for the actual song itself. There are two copyrights in recorded music. There's the copyright for the song or composition, and then there's a copyright for the recording of that song or composition. So if you want to sample part of Born to Run in your own song from the actual recording, you need to contact the owner of the sound recording, which might be Bruce Springsteen, but it's probably Bruce Springsteen's label. So you would need to contact the label and get them to give you permission to use the sample. And if they do give you permission, then you can negotiate how much you're actually gonna have to pay to use that. And they don't have to give you a license. If they do give you a license, they can really charge whatever they want. They can say, yeah, you can use the sample, but it's gonna cost you $1 million. And there's not really anything you can do about it. You can either pay the money or you don't use the sample. So as an independent artist, it can be very difficult to actually get samples cleared so that you can use them. If you don't have a very big fan base to begin with, labels probably aren't even going to respond to your request. They aren't even going to give you the time of day to have a conversation about using the sample. And legally, you can't use that sample without a license. If you do have a bunch of fans, on the other hand, and the label thinks that they might be able to make some money, well, then they might be willing to negotiate a fee to license the sample to you. But ultimately, it can be very difficult or even impossible in some cases to actually get a sample cleared to use. So for that reason, I would highly recommend using samples that have already been pre-cleared through a service like TrackLib, or use royalty-free sample packs. All right, so recording and releasing cover songs, super easy to do. Using samples from other recordings, that can be very difficult to do legally. Now, in most cases, you're going to want to stick with royalty-free sample packs or pre-cleared samples. You don't want to have to get a label's permission to use a sample after you've already put a bunch of work into getting a track ready to release, because you very well may not get a license. But cover songs are another story because the songwriter has to grant you a license. You just have to pay a royalty. So getting a license is actually a pretty simple process in most cases, as I'll explain in just a second. But before we get to that, let's quickly talk about whether or not you even need a license in the first place. There's a concept called public domain, which means that some creative works belong to the public. Nobody owns them. After a certain period of time, copyrights expire and become part of the public domain. The copyright duration of a musical composition is the lifetime of the author plus 70 years. So if you write a song, assuming you don't sell your copyright, you own the copyright of that song for your entire life. And then when you die, your family or your estate inherits the copyright so they can license it and earn royalties from it for up to 70 more years. And then at that point, the copyright expires and becomes part of the public domain. An example of works in the public domain would be classical compositions. Anything written by Beethoven or Mozart is now part of the public domain. So you can record a Beethoven sonata without having to pay anybody a license. What you cannot do is use a sample from a recording of a Beethoven sonata, because even though the underlying work, the composition by Beethoven, is in the public domain and free to use, that doesn't mean that the sound recording is. Someone likely owns the copyright to that recording, and you would need to get permission to use that. But anything in the public domain is free to use without a license. There's also something called fair use, which allows free usage of some copyrighted works in some instances, like a parody, for example. You might be able to create a parody of a song without the need for a license. However, what does and does not constitute fair use is very subjective, so if you think that something you're doing could fall into the category of fair use, I would highly advise you to seek out help from an entertainment attorney or copyright lawyer to confirm that what you're actually doing is indeed fair use. Now, for most of you watching this, you're probably interested in doing cover songs of songs that are copyrighted. So how do you obtain a license for that? Well, there's a company called the Harry Fox Agency that handles all that for you. And they have a service called Songfile that you can use at songfile.com to easily obtain a license to record a cover of any song you like. But in many cases, your distributor will actually handle all this stuff for you. When you upload your music through your distributor, they'll likely ask if the track is a cover song, and if so, they'll have you specify who the original songwriter is. Then they may charge you a small fee to obtain a license from the Harry Fox Agency on your behalf. If your distributor doesn't offer that service, that's no problem. You can just go to songfile.com and get the license yourself. And that's it. It's super easy to get licenses for cover songs. Now, not as easy to clear samples though. And if you want to create a music video for a cover song, well, that gets into something else entirely called sync licensing, which we're not going to cover here in this video. We'll have to save that for another time. But as far as recording cover songs for your album or for Spotify, getting a license is actually very easy, and oftentimes your distributor will actually handle the process for you. You might just have to pay a small fee, and then of course you will have to pay a royalty to the songwriter, which in most cases will just be taken out of your royalty check automatically ahead of time by your distributor. So again, to quickly recap, what is a copyright? Copyright is a legal right that gives the owner exclusive rights to make copies of a creative work. When it comes to recorded music, there are two types of copyrights involved. There's a copyright for the sound recording and one for the song itself. Now, the owner of the copyright for the song has to allow you to record the song if you want. This is called a compulsory mechanical license. You still have to pay a royalty, but you don't have to get permission per se. So recording and distributing cover songs is usually a simple process. Typically, your distributor will handle getting a license from the Harry Fox Agency for you. Alternatively, you can get it yourself by going to songfile.com. Samples, on the other hand, are a completely different story. Nobody has to give you permission to use part of a sound recording, so they can flat out deny you a license, or they can ignore your request altogether, or they can charge you an arm and a leg to license the sample. So for that reason, I recommend sticking with royalty-free samples or pre-cleared samples. That way, you don't end up in a situation where you need to get a license for a sample before you can release a track that you've already put a ton of work into, and you just can't get the license. So hopefully that helps clear things up a little bit with regards to when you need a license and how you can get one. And of course, please keep in mind that I am not an attorney, and nothing that I've said here should be taken as legal advice. If you have any questions about copyrights and licensing, and you're unsure about whether or not you're legally allowed to release something without a license, I would highly advise you to seek help from an actual attorney. That being said, I hope that I have been able to offer a little bit of help, a little bit of guidance here. If you have found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments section. And if you're not already subscribed to the YouTube channel, please go ahead and subscribe now and tick the little bell icon to be notified as soon as new videos are released here on the channel. If you'd like to be notified about new videos, blog posts, special promotions, and other tips and tricks and resources to help you promote your music, head over to JamMob.com and sign up to our mailing list. But that's going to wrap things up for this video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.